The rewards of sainthood are bestowed upon the worthy, provided they get the right person. The Misguided Halo by Henry Kuttner. Read by Karl. The youngest angel could scarcely be blamed for the error. They gave him a brand new shining halo and pointed down to the particular planet they meant. He had followed directions implicitly, feeling quite proud of the responsibility. This was the first time the youngest angel had ever been commissioned to bestow sainthood on a human. So he swooped down to the earth, located Asia, came to rest at the mouth of a cavern that gaped halfway up a Himalayan peak. He entered the cave, his heart beating wildly with excitement, preparing to materialize and give the Holy Lama his richly earned reward. For 10 years, the ascetic Tibetan Kai Yung had sat motionless, thinking holy thoughts. For 10 more years, he had dwelt on top of a pillar, acquiring additional merit. And for the last decade, he had lived in his cave, a hermit, forsaking filthy things. The youngest angel crossed the threshold and stopped with a gasp of amazement. Obviously, he was in the wrong place. An overpowering odor of fragrant sake assailed his nostrils. He stared aghast at the weakest, wizened, drunken little man who squat happily beside a fire, roasting a bit of goat flesh. A den of iniquity. Naturally, the youngest angel, knowing little of the ways of the world, could not understand what had led to the Lama's fall from grace. The great pot of sake that some misguidedly pious one had left at the cave mouth was an offering, and the Lama had tasted, and tasted again. And by this time he was clearly not a suitable candidate for sainthood. The youngest angel hesitated. Directions had been explicit. But surely this tippling reprobate could not be intended to wear a halo. The Lama hiccuped loudly and reached for another cup of sake, and therefore decided the angel, who had enfolded his wings and departed with an air of outraged dignity. Now, in the midwestern state of North America, there's a town called Tibet, who could find the angel if he alighted there, and after a brief search, discovered a man apparently ripe for sainthood, whose name, as stated on the door of a small suburban home, was K. Young. I must have got it wrong, the youngest angel thought. They had said it was K. Young, but this is Tibet, all right. He must be the man. Looks holy enough, anyway. Well, said the youngest angel, here goes. Now, where's that halo? Mr. Young sat on the edge of his bed, with head lowered, brooding, a depressing spectacle. At length he arose and donned various garments. This done, and shaved and washed and combed, he descended the stairs to breakfast. Jo Young, his wife, sat examining the paper and sipping orange juice. She was a small, scarcely middle-aged, and quite a pretty woman who had long ago given up trying to understand life. It was, she decided, much too complicated. Strange things were continually happening. Much better to remain a bystander and simply let them happen. As a result of this attitude, she kept her charming face unwrinkled and added numerous grey hairs to her husband's head. More will be said presently of Mr. Young's head. It had, of course, been transfigured during the night. But as yet he was unaware of this, and George drank orange juice and placidly approved the silly-looking hat in an advertisement. "Hello, Filthy," said Young. "Morning." He was not addressing his wife. A small and raffish Scotty had made its appearance, capering hysterically about his master's feet, and going to a feat of sheer madness when the man pulled his hairy ears. The raffish Scotty flung his head sideways upon the carpet and skated about room his muzzle, uttering strangled squeaks of delight. Growing tired of this at last, the Scotty, whose name was Filthy McNasty, began thumping his head on the floor with the apparent intention of dashing on his brains, if any. Young ignored the familiar sight. He sat down and folded his napkin and examined his food. With a slight drench of appreciation, he began to eat. He became aware that his wife was eyeing him with an odd and distrait expression. Hastily he dabbed at his lips with a napkin, but Jill still stared. Young scrutinized his shirt front. It was, if not immaculate, at least free from stray shreds of bacon or egg. Looked at his wife and realized he was staring at a point slightly above his head. He looked up. Jill started slightly. She whispered, "Kenneth, what is that?" Young smoothed his hair. What, dear? That thing in your head. The man ran exploring fingers across his scalp. My head? How do you mean? It's shining, Jill explained. What on earth have you been doing to yourself? Mr. Young felt slightly irritated. I've been doing nothing to myself. A man grows bald eventually. Jill frowned and drank orange juice. Her fascinated gaze crept up again. Finally she said, Kenneth, I wish you'd... What? She pointed to a mirror on the wall. With a disgusted grunt, Young arose and faced the image in the mirror. At first he saw nothing unusual. The same face he had been seeing in mirrors for years. Not an extraordinary face. Not one in which a man could point with pride and say, Look, my face. But on the other hand, certainly not a countenance which would cause a consternation. All in all, an ordinary, clean, well-shaved, and rosy face. Long association with it had given Mr. Young a feeling of tolerance, if not of actual admiration. But topped by a halo, it acquired a certain eeriness. The halo hung long suspended about 5 inches from the scalp. It measured perhaps 7 inches in diameter and seemed like a glowing, luminous ring of white light. It was impalpable, and Young passed his hand through it several times in a dazed manner. It's a halo, he said at last, and turned to stare at Jill. The Scotty, filthy McNasty, noticed the luminous adornment for the first time. He was greatly interested. He did not, of course, know what it was, but there was always a chance that it might be edible. He was not a very bright dog. Filthy sat up and whined. He was ignored. Barking loudly, he leapt forward and attempted to climb up his master's body in a mad attempt to reach and rend the halo. Since it had made no hostile move, it was evidently fair prey. Young defended himself, clutched the Scotty by the nape of his neck, and carried the yelping dog to another room where he left it. Then he returned and once more looked at Jill. At length she observed, Angels wear halos. Do I look like an angel? Young asked. It's a scientific manifestation. Like that girl whose bed kept bouncing around. You read about that? Jill had. She did it with her muscles. Well, I'm not. Young said definitely. How could I? It's scientific. What the things sign by themselves? Oh, yes. Toadstools. The man winced and rubbed his head. Thank you, my dear. I suppose you know you're being no help at all. Angels have halos, Jill said with a sort of dreadful insistence. Young was at the mirror again. Darling, would you mind keeping your trap shut for a while? I'm scared as hell, and you're far from encouraging. Jill burst into tears and left the room and was presently heard talking in a low voice to Filthy. Young finished his coffee, but it was tasteless. He was not as frightened as he had indicated. The manifestation was strange, weird, but in no way terrible. Horns, perhaps, would have caused horror and consternation. But a halo? Mr. Young read the Sunday newspaper supplements and learned that anything odd could be attributed to the bizarre workings of science. Somehow he had heard that all mythology had a basis in scientific fact. This comforted him until he was ready to leave for the office. He donned a derby. Unfortunately, the halo was too large. The hat appeared to have 2 brims, the upper one a whitely luminous. Damn, said Young in a heartfelt manner. He searched the closet and tried one hat after another. Nothing would hide the halo. Clearly he could not enter a crowded bus in such a state. A large furry object in the corner caught his eye. He dragged it out and eyed the thing with loathing. It was a deformed, gigantic woolly headpiece resembling a shako, which had once formed part of a masquerade costume. The suit itself had long since vanished, but the hat remained to the comfort of Filthy, who sometimes slept on it. Yet it would hide the halo. Gingerly, Young drew the monstrosity in his head and crept towards the mirror. One glance was enough. Mouthing a brief prayer, he opened the door and fled. Choosing between 2 evils is often difficult. More than once, during the nightmare ride downtown, Young decided he'd made the wrong choice. Yet somehow he could not bring himself to tear off the hat and stamp it underfoot, though he was longing to do so. Huddled in a corner of the bus, he steadily contemplated his fingernails and wished he was dead. He heard titters and muffled laughter, and was conscious of probing glances riveted on his shrinking head. A small child tore open the scar tissue on Young's heart and scrabbled about in the open wound with rosy, ruthless fingers. "Mama," said the small child piercingly, "look at the funny man." "Yes, honey," came a woman's voice. "Be quiet." "What's that in his head?" the brat demanded. There was a significant pause. Finally, the man said, "Well, I don't really know," in a baffled manner. "What's he getting on for?" No answer. "Mama?" "Yes, honey?" "Is he crazy?" "Be quiet," said the woman, dodging the issue. "But what is it?" Young could stand no longer. He rose and made his way with dignity through the bus, his glazed eyes seeing nothing. Standing on the outer platform, he kept his face averted from the fascinating gaze of the conductor. As the vehicle slowed down, Young felt a hand on his arm. He turned. The small child's mother was standing there, frowning. "Well?" Young inquired snappishly. "It's Billy," the woman said. "I try to keep nothing from him. Would you mind telling me just what that is on your head?" "It's Rasputin's beard," Young grated. "He willed it to me." The man lit from the bus, and ignoring a half-heard question from the still puzzled woman, tried to lose himself in the crowd. This was difficult. Many were intrigued by the remarkable hat. But luckily, Young was only a few blocks from his office, and at last, breathing hoarsely, he stepped into the elevator, glared murderously at the operator, and said, "Ninth floor." "Excuse me, Mr. Young," said the boy mildly, "there's something in your head." "I know," said Young replied. "I put it there." This seemed to settle the question. But as passengers left the elevator, the boy grinned wildly. When he saw the janitor a few minutes later, he said, "You know Mr. Young? The guy? I know him. So what?" "Drunk. Drunk is the word." "You're screwy." "Him? Tired on a drum," declared the youth. "So help me God." Meanwhile, the sage of Mr. Young made his way to the office of Dr. French, a physician whom he knew slightly, and was conveniently located in the same building. He had not long to wait. The nurse, after one startled glance at the remarkable hat, vanished and almost immediately reappeared to usher the patient into the inner sanctum. Dr. French, a large, bland man with a waxed yellow mustache, greeted Young almost effusively. Come in. How are you doing? Nothing wrong, I hope. Let me take your hat." "Wait," Young said, fending off the physician. "First, let me explain. There's something on my head." "Cut, bruise, or fracture?" the little-minded doctor inquired. "I'll fix you up in a jiffy." "I'm not sick," said Young. "At least I hope not. I've got, a halo." "Ha ha ha," Dr. French applauded. "Halo, eh? Surely you're not that good." "Oh, the hell with it," Young snapped and snatched off his head. The doctor retreated a step. Then interested, he approached and tried to finger the halo. He failed. This is odd," he said at last. "Does look rather like one, doesn't it? What is it? That's what I want to know." French hesitated. He plucked his mustache. "Well, it's right on my line. A physicist might know. Perhaps males. Does it come off?" "Of course not. You can't even touch the thing." "Ah, I see. Well, I should like some specialist opinions. In the meantime, let me see." There was orderly tumult. Young's heart, temperature, blood, saliva, and epidermis were tested and approved. At length, French said, You're fit as a fiddle. Come in tomorrow at 10. I'll have some other specialists here then. You can't just get rid of this?" "I'd rather not try just yet. It's always some form of radioactivity. A radiation treatment may be necessary." Young left the man mumbling about alpha and gamma rays. Discouraged, he donned his strange hat and went down the hall to his own office. The Atlas Advertising Agency was the most conservative of all advertising agencies. Two brothers with white whiskers had started the firm in 1820, and the company still seemed to wear dignified mental whiskers. Changes were frowned upon by the board of directors, who were, in 1938, were finally convinced that radio would come to stay and accepted contracts for advertising broadcasts. Once a junior vice president had been discharged for wearing a red necktie. Young slunk into his office. It was vacant. He slid into his chair behind the desk, removed his hat, and gazed at it with loathing. The headpiece seemed to have grown even more horrid than it appeared at first. It was shedding, and moreover gave a faint but unmistakable aroma of unbathed Scotties. After investigating the halo and realized it was still firmly fixed in its place, Young turned to his work. But the Norns were casting baleful glances in his direction, for presently the door opened and Edwin J. Kipp, president of Atlas, entered. Young barely had time to duck his head beneath the desk and hide the halo. Kipp was a small, dapper, and dignified man who wore pince-nez and Van Dyke with the air of reserved fish. His blood had long since been metamorphosed into ammonia. He moved, if not in beauty, at least in an almost visible aura of grim conservatism. "Good morning, Mr. Young," he said. Is that you?" "Yes," said the invisible Young. "Good morning. I'm tying my, shoelace." To this, Cup made no reply save for an almost inaudible cough. Time passed. The desk was silent. "Mr. Young, I'm still here," said the wretched Young. "It's knotted. The shoelace, I mean. Did you want me?" "Yes." Kip waited with gradually increasing impatience. There were no signs of a forthcoming emergence. The president considered the advisability of his advancing to the desk and peering under it. But the mental picture of a conversation conducted in so grotesque a manner was harrowing. He simply gave up and told Young what he wanted. "Mr. Devlin has just telephoned," Kip observed. "He will arrive shortly. He wishes to be shown to town," as he put it. The invisible Young nodded. Devlin was one of their best clients. Or rather, he had been until last year, when he suddenly began to do business with another firm, to the discomfiture of Kip and the board of directors. The president went on. "He told me he's hesitating about this new contract. He planned to give it to Worrell, but I had some correspondence with him on the matter. I suggested a personal discussion might be of value. So he's visiting our city, wishes to go sightseeing." Kip grew confidential. "I may say that Mr. Devlin told me definitely he prefers a less conservative firm. Stodgy, his term was. He will dine with me tonight, and I will endeavour to convince him that our service will be of value." "Yes," Kip coughed again. "Yet diplomacy is, of course, important. I should appreciate your entertaining Mr. Devlin today." The desk remained silent during this oration. Now it said convulsively, "I'm sick. I can't." "You are ill. Shall I summon a physician?" Young hastily refused the offer, but remained in hiding. "No, I mean, you are behaving most strangely," Kip said with commendable restraint. "There's something you should know, Mr. Young. I not intend to tell you it yet, but at any rate the board has taken notice of you. There was discussion at the last meeting. We have planned to offer you a presidency in the firm." The desk was stricken dumb. "You have upheld our standards for 15 years, said Kip. There has been no hint of scandal attached to your name. I congratulate you, Mr. Young." The president stepped forward, extending his hand. An arm emerged from beneath the desk, shook Kip's, and quickly vanished. Nothing further happened. Young tenaciously remained in his sanctuary. Kip realized, short of dragging the man out bodily, he could not hope to view an entire Candace Young for the present. With an admonitory cough, he withdrew. The miserable Young emerged, wincing as his cramped muscles relaxed. A pretty kettle of fish. How could he entertain Devlin while he wore a halo? It was vitally necessary that Devlin be entertained, else the elusive vice presidency would be immediately withdrawn. Young knew only too well that employees of Atlas Advertising Agency trod a perilous pathway. His reverie was interrupted by the sudden appearance of an angel atop of the bookcase. It was not a high bookcase, and the supernatural visitor sat there calmly enough, heels dangling and wings furled. A scanty robe of white samite made up the angel's wardrobe, that and a shining halo, the sight of which Young felt a wave of nausea sweep him. "This," he said with rigid restraint, "is the end. A halo may be due to mass hypnotism, but when I start seeing angels—" "Don't be afraid," said the other. "I'm real enough." Young's eyes were wild. "How do I know? I'm obviously talking to empty air. It's schizo something. Go away." The angel wrinkled his toes and looked embarrassed. I can't, just yet. The fact is, I made a bad mistake. You may have noticed you've a slight halo. Young gave a short, bitter laugh. Oh, yes, I've noticed it. Before the angel replied, the door opened. Kip looked in, saw that Young was engaged, and murmured, Excuse me, as he reviewed. The angel scratched his golden curls. Well, your halo was intended for somebody else. A Tibetan Lama, in fact. But there was certain chain of circumstances I was led to believe you were the candidate for sainthood. So, the visitor made a comprehensive gesture. Young was baffled. I don't quite... The Lama, well, sinned. No sinner may wear a halo. And as I say, I gave it to you through error. Then you can take it away again? Amazed delight suffused Young's face. But the angel raised a benevolent hand. Fear not, I have checked with the recording angel. You have led a blameless life. As a reward, you will be permitted to keep the halo of sainthood. The horrified man sprang to his feet, making feeble swing motions with his arms. But, peace and blessings be upon you, said the angel, and vanished. Young fell back in his chair and massaged his aching brow. Simultaneously, the door opened and Kip stood on the threshold. Luckily, Young's hand temporarily hid the halo. Mr. Devlin is here, the president said. Who's that in the bookcase? Young was too crushed to lie plausibly. He muttered, An angel. Kip nodded in satisfaction. Yes, of course. What? You say an angel? An angel? Oh my gosh. The man turned white and hastily took his departure. Young contemplated his hat. The thing still lay on the desk, wincing slightly under the baleful stare directed at it. To go through life wearing a halo was only less endurable than the thought of continually wearing the loathsome hat. Young brought his fist down viciously on the desk. I won't stand it. I don't have to. He stopped abruptly, a dazed look going in his eyes. That's right. I don't have to stand it. If the Lama got out of it, of course. No sinner may wear a halo. Young's round face twisted into a mask of sheer evil. I'll be a sinner then. I'll break all the commandments. He pondered. At the moment, he couldn't remember what they were. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. That was one. Young thought of his neighbor's wife, a certain Mrs. Clay, a behemothike damsel of some 50 summers with a face like a desiccated pudding. There was one command he had no intention of breaking. But probably one good healthy sin would bring back the angel in a hurry to remove the halo. What crimes would result in the least inconvenience? Young furrowed his brow. Nothing occurred to him. He decided to go for a walk. No doubt some sinful opportunity would present itself. He forced himself to don the shako and reached the elevator when a hoarse voice was heard hallooing after him. Racing along the hall was a fat man. Young knew instinctively that this was Mr. Devlin. The adjective fat, as applied to Devlin, was a considerable understatement. The man bulged. His feet, strangled in biliously yellow shoes, burst out of the ankles like blossoming flowers. They emerged into calves that seemed to gather momentum as they spread and mounted, flung themselves up with mad abandon and revealed themselves in the complete unrestrained glory at Devlin's middle. The man resembled, in silhouette, a pineapple with elephantitis. A great mass of flesh poured out of his collar, forming a pale sagging lump in which Young discerned some vague resemblance to a face. Such was Devlin as he charged along the hall as mammoths thundered by with earth-shaking tramplings of his crashing hooves. You're Young, he wheezed. Almost missed me, eh? It was waiting in the office. Devlin paused, his fascinating gaze upon the hat. Then, with an effort of politeness, he laughed falsely and glanced away. Well, I'm all ready and raring to go. Young felt himself impaled painfully in the horns of a dilemma. Failure to entrain Devlin would mean the loss of that vice presidency, but the halo weighed like a flight iron on Young's throbbing head. One thought was foremost in his head. He had to get rid of the blessed thing. Once he'd done that, he could trust to luck and diplomacy. Obviously, to take out his guest now would be fatal. Insanity. The hat alone would be fatal. Sorry, Young grunted. Got an important engagement. I'll be back for you as soon as I can. Wheezing laughter, Devlin attached himself firmly to the other's arm. No, you don't. You're showing me the town. Right now. An unmistakable alcoholic odor was wafted to Young's nostrils. He thought quickly. All right, he said. Come along. There's a bar downstairs. We'll have a drink, eh? Now you're talking, said the jovial Devlin, almost incapacitating Young with a comradely slap on the back. Is the elevator. He crowded into the cage. Young shut his eyes and suffered as instant stares were directed upon the hat. He fell into a state of coma, arousing only at the ground floor when Devlin dragged him out into the adjacent bar. Now Young's plan was this. He would pour drink of a drink down his companion's capacious gullet and await his chance to slip away unobserved. It was a shrewd scheme, but it had one flaw. Devlin refused to drink alone. One for you and one for me, he said. That's fair. Have another. Young could not refuse, under the circumstances. The worst of it was that Devlin's liquor seemed to seep into every cell of his huge body, leaving him, finally, in the same state of glowing happiness which had been his originally. But poor Young was, to put it as terribly as possible, tight. He sat quietly in the booth, glaring across at Devlin. Each time the waiter arrived, Young knew that the man's eyes were riveted upon the hat, and each round made the thought of that more irritating. Also, Young worried about his halo. He brooded over sins. Arson, burglary, sabotage, and murder passed his quick review through his befuddled mind. Once he attempted to snatch the waiter's change, but the man was too alert. He laughed pleasantly and placed a fresh glass before Young. The waiter eyed it with distaste. Suddenly, coming to a decision, he arose and wavered toward the door. Devlin overtook him on the sidewalk. What's the matter? Let's have another. I have work to do, said Young with painful distinctiveness. He snatched a walking cane from a passing pedestrian and made threatening gestures with it until the remonstrating victim fled hurriedly. Hefting the stick in his hand, he brooded blackly. Well, why work? Devlin inquired largely. Show me the town. I have important matters to attend to. Young scrutinized a small child who had been halted by the curb and was recurring the stare with interest. The tot looked remarkably like the brat who had been so insulting on the bus. What's important? Devlin demanded. Important matters, eh? Such as what? Beating small children, said Young, and rushed upon the startled child, brandishing his cane. The youngster uttered a still scream and fled. Young pursued for a few feet, and then became entangled with a lamp-post. The lamp-post was impolite and dictatorial. It refused to allow Young to pass. The man remonstrated and finally argued, but to no avail. The child had long since damaged. Administering a brisk and snappy rebuke to the lamppost, Young turned away. What in Pete's name are you trying to do? Devlin inquired. That cop's looking at us. Come along. Took the other's arm and led him along the crowded sidewalk. What am I trying to do? Young sneered. It's obvious, isn't it? I wish to sin. Sin? Sin. Why? Young tapped his hat meaningfully, but Devlin put an altogether wrong interpretation on the gesture. You're nuts? Oh, shut up, Young snapped in a sudden burst of rage and thrust his cane between the legs of a passing bank president, whom he knew slightly. The unfortunate man fell heavily to the cement, but arose without injury save to his dignity. I beg your pardon, he barked. Young was going through a strange series of gestures. He fled to a shop window mirror and was doing fantastic things to his hat, apparently trying to lift it in order to catch a glimpse at the top of his head. A sight, it seemed, to be shielding jealousy from profane eyes. At length he cursed loudly, turned, gave the bank president a contemptuous stare, and hurried away, trailing the puzzled Devlin like a captive balloon. Young was muttering thickly to himself. Got to sin, really sin, something big. Burn down an orphan asylum. Kill my mother-in-law. Kill anybody. He looked quickly at Devlin, and the latter shrank back in sudden fear. But finally Young gave a disgusted grunt. Eh, too much blubber. Couldn't use a gun or a knife. Half the blast. Look, Young said, clutching Devlin's arm. Stealing's a sin, isn't it? Sure is, the diplomatic Devlin agreed, but you're not. Young shook his head. No, shook out his ear. Louis going to jail. Come on. He plunged forward. Devlin followed. And Young fulfilled his promise to show his guest the town, though afterward neither of them could remember exactly what had happened. Presently, Devlin paused in the liquor store for refueling and emerged with bottles protruding here and there from his clothing. Hours merged into alcoholic haze. Life began to assume an air of foggy unreality to the unfortunate Devlin. He sank presently into a coma, deeply conscious of various events which marched with celerity through the afternoon and long into the night. Finally, he roused himself sufficiently to realize he was standing with Young outside, confronting a wooden Indian which stood quietly outside a cigar store. It was perhaps the last of the wooden Indians. The outland relic of a bygone day, it seemed to stare with faded glass eyes at the bundle of wooden cigars it held in an extended hand. Young was no longer wearing a hat, and Devlin suddenly noticed something decidedly peculiar about his companion. He said softly, "You've got a halo." Young started slightly. "Yes," he replied, "I've got a halo. This Indian—" He paused. Devlin eyed the image with disfavor. To his somewhat fuzzy brain, the wooden Indian appeared even more horrid than the surprising halo. He shuddered and hastily averted his gaze. "Stealing's a sin," Young said under his breath, and then with an elated cry stooped to lift the Indian. He fell immediately under its weight, emitting a string of smoking oaths as he attempted to dislodge the incubus. "Heavy," he said, rising at last. "Give me a hand." Devlin had long since given up hope of finding sanity in this madman's actions. Young was obviously determined to sin, and the fact that he possessed a halo was somewhat disquieting, even to the drunken Devlin. As a result, the two men proceeded down the street, bearing with them the rigid body of a wooden Indian. The proprietor of the cigar shop came out and looked after them, rubbing his hands, his eyes following the departed statue with unmitigated joy. "For 10 years I've tried to get rid of that thing," he whispered gleefully, "and now, ha-ha!" He re-entered the store and lit a Corona to celebrate his emancipation. Meanwhile, Young and Devlin found a taxi stand. One cab stood there. The driver sat puffing a cigarette, listening to his radio. Young hailed the man. "Cab, sir?" The driver sprang to life, bounced out of the car, and flung open the door. There he remained frozen in a half-crouching position, his eyes revolving wildly in their sockets. He never believed in ghosts. He was, in fact, somewhat of a cynic. But in the face of a bulbous ghoul in a decadent angel bearing the stiff corpse of an Indian, he felt, with a sudden blinding shock of realization, that beyond life lies a black abyss teeming with horror unimaginable. Whining shrilly, the terrifying man leaped back into his cab, got the thing in motion, and vanished to smoke before the gale. Young and Devlin looked at each other ruefully. "What now?" the latter asked. "Well," said Young, "I don't live far from here, only 10 blocks or so. Come on." It was very late, and few pedestrians were abroad. These few, for the sake of their sanity, were quite willing to ignore the wanderers and go their separate ways. So eventually Young, Devlin, and the wooden Indian arrived at their destination. The door of Young's home was locked, and he could not locate the key. He was curiously averse to arousing Jill, but for the same reason he found it vitally necessary that the wooden Indian be concealed. The cellar was the logical place. He dragged his two companions to a basement window, smashed as quietly as he could, and slid the image through the gap. "Do you really live here?" asked Devlin, who had his doubts. "Hush," Young said warningly. "Come on." He followed the wooden Indian, landing with a crash in a heap of coal. Devlin joined him with much wheezing and grunting. It was not dark. The halo provided about as much illumination as a 25-watt globe. Young left Devlin to nose his bruises and began searching for the wooden Indian. It had unaccountably vanished. But he found it at last cowering beneath the washtub, dragged the object out and set it up on a corner. Then he stepped back and faced it, swaying a little. "That's a sin, all right," he chuckled. "Theft. Isn't the amount that matters, it's the principle of the thing. Wooden Indian is just as important as $1,000,000, Devlin? I'd like to chop that Indian into fragments, said Devlin with passion, and maybe carry it for 3 miles. He paused, listening. What in heaven's name is that? A small tumult was approaching. Filthy, having been instructed off on his duties as a watchdog, now faced opportunity. Noises were proceeding from the cellar. Burglars, no doubt. The raffish Scotty cascaded down the stairs in a babble of frightful threats and oaths, loudly declaring his intention of eviscerating the intruders. He flung himself upon Young, who made hasty clucking sounds intended to soothe the Scotty's aroused passions. Filthy had other ideas. He spun like a dervish, yelling bloody murder. Young wavered, made a vague snatch of the air, and fell prostrate to the ground. He remained face down, while Filthy, seeing the halo, rushed at it and trampled upon his master's head. The wretched Young felt the ghost of a dozen or more drinks rising to confront him. He clutched at the dog, missed, and gripped instead the feet of the wooden Indian. The image swayed perilously. Filthy cocked up an apprehensive eye and fled down the length of his master's body, pausing halfway as he remembered his duty. With a muffled curse, he sank his teeth into the nearest portion of Young and intended to yank off the miserable man's pants. Meanwhile, Young remained face down, clutching the feet of the wooden Indian in a despairing grip. It was a resounding clap of thunder. White light blazed through the cellar. The angel appeared. Devlin's legs gave way, sat down in a plump heap, shut his eyes, and began chattering quietly to himself. Filthy swore at the intruder, made an unsuccessful attempt to obtain a firm grasp on one of the gently fanning wings, and went back to think it over, arguing socially. The wing had an unsatisfying lack of substantiality. The angel stood over Young with golden fires glowing in his eyes and a benign look of pleasure molding his noble features. This, he said quietly, shall be taken as a symbol of your first successful good deed since your inhalement. A wingtip brushed the dark and grimy visage of the Indian. Forthwith, there was no Indian. You have whitened the heart of a fellow man. Little, to be sure, but some, and at the cost of much labor on your part. For a day you have struggled with this sort to redeem him, but for this no success has rewarded you, albeit the moralist pains will afflict you. Go forth, K. Young, rewarded and protected from all sin alike by your halo. The youngest angel faded quietly, for which alone Young was grateful. His head was beginning to ache, and he feared a possible thunderous vanishment. Filthy laughed nastily and resumed his attack on the halo. Young found the unpleasant act of standing upright necessary. While it made the walls and tubs spin round him like all the hosts of heaven, it made impossible Filthy's dervish dash upon his face. Some time later he woke, cold, sober, and regretful of the fact. He lay between cool sheets, watching morning sunlight lance through the windows, his eyes, and feeling it splinter and jagged bits in his brain. His stomach was making spasmodic attempts to leap up and squeeze itself out through his burning throat. Simultaneous when it came realization of three things. The pains of the morrow had indeed afflicted him, the halo mirrored still on the glass above the dressing table, and the parting words of the angel. He gave a heartfelt triple groan. The headache would pass, but the halo he knew would not. Only by sinning could one become unworthy of it, and shining protector, he made him unlike other men. His deeds must all be good, his works a help to men. He could not sin. The end.